Hi friends, Laurelei Black here from Blade and Broom, and this week we're going to be talking about the Witch's Stang and how it relates to a much older tool that is the vulva's stav, which if you saw my last video from 2 weeks ago, that was what we unboxed on the channel. So if you didn't catch that one, you can go back and see me opening a new tool that I just received that is a forged iron stav. And this week we're going to be talking about how that tool, which is a very, very ancient tool from the northern tradition of Seidr and volur magic, is actually the predecessor or the great-great-grandmother of the Witch's Stang. Before we get into all that though, I want to give just a really short announcement that I have just recently signed on to be a contributor to OOAK Publications, which is an online witchy and pagan lifestyle publication. There are several free articles there every month, including some things that I'm going to be contributing starting in November. And then behind the paywall, if you choose to become a member of the site, and it's very, very affordable to do that, there are lots of additional content pieces that you can have access to, and it is rich with content. So I highly recommend that you look into that, and that is OOAK Publication, and that the O in OOAK is actually a 0. So I'm going to put links down below. Check it out if it is your will to do so. But there's going to be lots of great content there from me and from the other contributors. I'm going to be contributing about folkloric witchcraft. So hope to see you over there. So let's jump back into this stav and stang stuff. Say that 3 times fast. Stav and stang, stav and stangs. Anyway, for a lot of folks practicing the craft today, the stang is actually an unfamiliar tool. Unless you're practicing traditional craft, you're probably not that familiar with the stang. It doesn't get mentioned or used much outside of traditional witchcraft. It gets mentioned by a few practitioners in books like, so Scott Cunningham in his book Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner, does actually mention the stang, and he references it, I think, as something like an upright altar. And I remember so Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner was one of the very first books that I read as a baby witch back in 1997. And I remember thinking when I read about that, and he said it was a vertical altar or an upright altar, I remember wondering what in the world that looked like, and you couldn't find pictures of it in any of these books. It was just like a blurb in a glossary. So I didn't know for a couple of years when I got involved with a whole group, like multiple traditions of traditional craft groups out in Southern California that were practicing traditional craft, what a stang was. And to call it an upright altar or vertical altar is really sort of a limited and an unsatisfactory definition. It's a much more complex tool than that. It is, and you'll have to forgive me for waxing a little bit poetical here, but I've said before that traditional craft is full of something called mythopoesis, and I am nothing if not a mythic poet. It is the omphalos of our tradition. It is the world navel. It is the central point of our compass, of our circle. It is our world tree, and it is a symbolic of both the witch mother and the witch father of our tradition. It is the most holy object within our tradition, and it is a useful tool that we actually use. We don't just put it there and revere it, we actually work with it hands-on. It is a riding pole, like the broom, and like the stav or the staff. And it is out of the northern tradition of magic that those things actually become that transvective device in which we cross the boundaries of the worlds, in which we do hedge riding, in which we do that border crossing into the other realms. And so, yes, we raise the stang and we put it there in the center, but it is so much more than that. And so we're going to talk just a little bit about that today, about how it is symbolic of that and why it is symbolic of that. And I'm going to give you lots of articles that dive deeper into that in the links if you want to do that deep dive. And then in another video somewhere down the line soon, I will show you how we do that, which is going to be super exciting and also a little nerve-wracking for me, because it's really going to be sort of like putting myself out there to like show you that process. But I'm excited to do that. So let's talk about why it is that the stang is that symbol, right? So for a lot of people, the stang looks like a pitchfork. And I'm not saying that it's not a pitchfork, but I'm saying kind of that it's not a pitchfork. What it really is, when I say that it's not a pitchfork, what I'm saying is that it might be a pitchfork in disguise. That's sort of the cloak that it's put on to fool the masses. But what it really is, at its heart, is a distaff, which is very symbolic of women's magic in the northern traditions. And that comes to us from the Save Konas, from the volvas. These types of magic are brought to us and taught to us by Freya and by the Norns. And so they are very intimately linked to concepts of weaving and spinning and cutting. And so there is a lot of this idea of how this very trance-inducing, repetitive, seething type work gets tied into magic, and it even spills over into the words that we use within our magic currently, within our sorcery currently, this idea of weaving threads of magic, of weaving liminal spaces. There's a fantastic book on the market right now by Laurelei Zaycroft called Weaving the Liminal. And you see in it then that idea of weaving threads of magic and how there's this interconnected web. We talk about that idea of the web of magic. And the staff, the distaff, is a tool then for gathering and spinning those threads of magic. The staff that becomes the stang is a 2 or 3 pronged distaff. So within the Norse practice, you see the volva stav looking like a basket-topped spindle, or sometimes just a staff, the way we think of it being just sort of a stick-like device, but very often it had that sort of that basket-topped spindle look to it, like the stav that I have just recently purchased and received. But as the tool developed in Anglo-Saxon spinning, it sometimes was a 2 or 3 pronged stick. So we see in wood carvings, which is going to join the Sabbat, flying through the night on either a stick that has no forks on the end and no brush like a broom, or on a broom that has that brushy end, or on a forked stick. And that forked stick isn't just some random forked stick, it's their distaff, it's their stang. And all of those things are a gander, a gandride, a riding pole. And I know I've just thrown out that new word for you, or maybe it's not a new word, maybe you're familiar with that term, but it again comes from the Norse, which is, and it just means riding pole, but it's also then possibly embedded in things like Mother Goose, when she wanted to wander, would ride through the air on a very fine gander. Would ride through the air on a very fine riding pole. Maybe not so much a goose, right? So Mother Goose has embedded often within that folklore, within those rhymes, we see these little bits of witch lore, of the folklore. So anyway, the stang ends up representing either with its two prongs, with its two horns, or with its three. And often when it has the three, that middle one is kind of a shortened one, or it's just a smaller one that you can like hang something on, like maybe a goat skull or a ram skull or a deer skull, or that you can poke a candle onto, or it's just a candle holder. Or we see on top of the skull a candle flame, and so it's not actually a prong but a candlestick. But very often those two branches represent a lot of the dualities within the craft. So it's the left and the right hand paths of magic, both of which are equally accessible to the witch. It's the masculine and feminine mysteries. It's a lot of the choices and options that are available to us, all of which are equally accessible. And then the middle is that path of enlightenment, that path of choice, of the twisting and the turnings and the cutting fire, the winding our way between the two, the picking and the choosing, and the coming back to center, the finding balance, and that coming in and out of balance that we have to do sometimes to be able to walk between the worlds. There's so much. I mentioned just really briefly that within a northern context, the work of the Seidkona, or the work of the volva, was considered very much women's work, women's magic, because it was very tied to Freya and the Norns, and to women's tasks like spinning and weaving and that type of thing. But it's really notable that Odin is also very tied to this work, and that Odin then is also, like another name for him is Holt. A little tricky for me in just this video to show you the etymology and the lineage of this, but he's Holt, the leader of the wild hunt as well, or it's Hulda, Frau Hulda, the leader of the wild hunt, all of which is very much associated with witches and the night flight and all of that. And so we have, again, these concepts of the witch mother and the witch father, and Odin is so much tied to that as this bringer of magic, this giver of magic. And so we have in Hulda, in Odin, other examples across the continent, across the culture, of the witch mother and the witch father, and how these are not limited by gender. Magic is not limited by gender, and it is not confined to gender roles. And that's really kind of the topic for a whole other video. So I won't go into that here necessarily, but it's worth saying that there is sort of, there is ambiguity, and there is that idea of cloaking these ideas, and Odin is sort of this master of disguise too, right? He's known to wander around the landscape in these different disguises, this gray wanderer, and bringing mysteries and bringing insight and wisdom to people, much like our stang, our distaff, the woman's tool, disguising itself as the pitchfork, and being right out there in plain sight, but not revealing itself for exactly what it is. So this is just sort of a teaser and to get your whistle wetted for some more information about the Stang. It is a remarkable tool. If this is the first little dive that you've done into it, I promise there is more to come. Like I said, I'm going to talk with you more about how to use the Stang, including some insights that I've had just over the last year or two about how the stav is used in Sather, including the stav and tane work, and how that relates to our Stang and arrows, because that's something that I have not seen other witches talk about, and I want to talk about it. I want to show our community how that can be applied to our seething. So like, subscribe, share, do all the things. Check out the links. I have stuff for you guys down there. I have articles for you to dive into if you're interested in that. I have BOS pages if you're interested in adding some of this information to your Book of Shadows, and all that good stuff. So I will see you back here next Monday at noon. And in the meantime, take care and bye, guys.